Oh, I'm
There's a
sorry.
question.
Oh, yeah, correct.
So I didn't know if it's later in the
No, go ahead.
presentation, but I really have questions around, managing scope or getting to done. Where you're gonna talk about that from an executive sponsor.
I think Brian's.
It's perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect segue.
Perfect segue, thank you.
Yeah, we'll give you that.
Well, let's start on that. And so now we're in execution. The project has started. You're ongoing. You identified a couple of risks in the beginning, and now they've materialized into issues. Perfect issue is scope creep. That I want one of our panelists to talk about. But I want to open it to them. Give us a couple of those big issues that have come up in your time as a project sponsor and how you've handled them. Okay. Each one of the panel members.
I'll talk about scope creep first. So I think the scope creep part is one of those things where you draw on your strength in managing people because the scope creep is because the staff working this have desperate needs to get certain things they want in the project. And to be able to rein them back in without turning them off from the project is a very nuanced ability. It's very difficult to say no without having people feel like all their work is for nothing. So that's a real challenge, and I think something that I don't know it is at the executive sponsor level, more at the project sponsor level. I see that more. I don't think that's something that generally the executive sponsor is getting into.
I think also, one of the advantages of using Agile is that it really, really helps minimize or avoid scope creep because you're dealing in such small chunks that you've got to focus on that, 2-week sprint. As you as you develop additional user stories, you can add those into subsequent sprints, but that's one of the real primary benefits of Agile is it just keeps you focused on what you're doing now. What is the most important thing to focus on for this chunk? So I would, for folks who are concerned about scope creep, think about as you break things up into smaller chunks and you use Agile to coalesce a small sprint team that has everybody working together around that very clear sort of user story for that sprint. It just helps avoid other stuff creeping in. You can put it in the parking lot.
Beyond just scope creep, there are many other challenges that projects will face, trade-offs that you as an executive have to manage. What are some of the other challenges where you found yourself stepping in and playing that executive sponsor role to kind of navigate that project?
So none of your projects are going to be in a vacuum. You always have outside influences. We had our first project going live 12 years ago. Had legislation that was enacted that said we had to come live 4 months prior to what we were planning to come live at. And so in order to actually bring the project live, we ended up having to cut scope, which was painful to the staff who had been working at that point for 12 months on what they thought they were bringing live. And in order to make our deadline, because of the legislature, we had to cut scope. And so that as the executive sponsor, that's the tough decision that you have to make. You're going to have to, that's an executive sponsor decision, is how are we going to get this done? Obviously, the team is going to provide you with options. They're gonna give you those options, but you're going to have to make the tough decision.
I completely agree. Same thing. The key too is making sure you're hearing everybody. That's part of it. Even if we can't proceed with what they want, that you're hearing all the pieces and parts, and then you're going full circle and getting back to everyone so everyone understands the decision, why you made it, what's included in it, and where we're going to go moving forward, how we are going to address their needs at some point down the road. So it's always back to the communication.
And I'll say too, what I'm noticing is we're preparing for conversion, so we're doing a phased implementation. So we'll be doing multiple conversions. There's a real opportunity for scope creep in terms of well, how about if we clean this? How about if we clean that? And so one of the things I've done kind of strategically is talk to folks in other departments who've gone through large implementations and ask them what their approach was, just so that I have more of a sense of kind of what happens in the real world and what some of the consequences are. And one of my new strategies is to ask all of my executive teammates who will say, well, how about if we do this? What if we do that? You know, what happens if we don't? Because I want to preserve the scope, schedule, and the budget, and it's so easy to kind of add on. This is our chance, you know. We're not going to get another chance to cleanse this data. We'll say we'll do it after the project. That never happens, so let's do it now. And those are difficult pressures. Those are political pressures to push back against, but I see that as part of my role to really keep to the original scope and get, you know, deliver what we needed initially.
So as a sponsor, where you don't have the day-to-day role on the project as a project versus the project manager, you're oftentimes getting a lot of information from the status meetings, and you get that feedback there. How do you, as a sponsor, foster an environment where you're able to hear the issues, where people are free to share those issues? What are some of the tips and tricks that you can maybe share to folks who will become a sponsor and who are no longer there in the weeds, and how do they encourage that kind of an environment?
So one thing that I did is that I made it a regular practice. I didn't attend every like staff or project meeting, but I would attend maybe once a month. And I would let people know I'm coming, and I would say that one of the reasons I'm coming is because I want to hear from all of you. I want to hear your concerns. I want to hear not just what's going well. And so I always tended to have an open door policy anyway, but by scheduling time to meet with the team and making it clear that that's their time, helps surface some of those issues and create a sense of direction and vision and clarity around what's most important and how to surface and mitigate issues.
And this is something that's near and dear to my own heart too, because I've seen this happen, you know, in our building and in others. You know, for us as the executives, if your communication style is sort of top down, and then staff will react to that, and they're going to look for cues from you. And I try to be as neutral as possible and stay silent as long as possible, because I want to see what bubbles up. And that's when I've, you know, been able to identify a couple of really key issues from the business side on our project, just because I'm waiting for people to tell me and not sort of marching in with a predetermined view of this isn't going well or this is going well, because often there's nuances that I may not understand, and I see that as my role to kind of bring that out in others.
Yeah, I would add too, reading the body language is always important in your group think meetings and decisions. I make sure I'm really trying to stay in tune with that, and then I follow up sometimes individually with key players throughout the meetings on a one-on-one, just to make sure I'm really getting the full detail, full issues, where they're coming from. Again, making sure I'm hearing everything. For whatever reason, sometimes in a group setting, people once in a while will, you know, maybe give their full feeling on a situation, and it's up to us to really ferret that out.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and I also want to hear from the audience if there's any questions they have. There's some index cards there if you want to submit a question. But for the panelists, I want to hear about change management. Such a very important aspect of whenever a project, a new effort is ongoing. What are the ways that you, as an executive sponsor, have led change management, have encouraged it, have implemented it in your experience?
I'll start. For me, change management is an entire component as part of your project. You actually have a change manager that you're assigned to the project to make sure that you're doing all the pieces and parts. I think projects tend to skimp on that sometimes and don't understand the significance and the importance. As I've mentioned, we're on a journey, and if you want your people, your stakeholders, your executives, the administration to come along with you, you need to really tap into all that, whether you're doing stakeholder presentations or communicating town halls with your staff. All those pieces are incredibly important to really ensure the overall success.
Yeah, and I think that finding ways to be really inclusive, as was mentioned this morning, is really important to creating a culture in which people can voice their concerns. Because I think one of the things that's really hardest is that you're going to have people who are in different places along that spectrum of being comfortable versus being intimidated versus just being totally unengaged. And so figuring out how do you provide opportunities for people to voice and then address kind of how they're feeling about things and how they're responding to things is really key. Sometimes those can be, you can have, I would have all hands meetings or town hall meetings or other things like that, but not everybody's going to raise their hand in public. And so finding other ways that are more private for people to voice their issues and then address them is really, really important.
Questions before we move on? So let us move on to the next phase of a project, the transition and the closing. So the project that you've been working on has been a success, and now it's time to transition the project to the business units responsible for sustaining the operations of the project, and also time to celebrate. I want to, on a happy note, ask our sponsors, what are some of the ways that you as a sponsor have transitioned your project or have celebrated the success of your projects? And what's been your role in this phase of the project?
So I'm in genetics. We have never closed anything out because we're always adding something new. I can say we do take the time to celebrate every big build, every big go live. It's really important for the staff to acknowledge that. If it's a Costco cake in the afternoon or something, but some way to acknowledge all the hard work and to provide the closure for the staff, even if there's always going to be ongoing issues. Very, very important.
Yeah, and I would say just one thing I meant to say in the previous question about change management. The other thing that we found is vital is encouraging coaching and mentoring, because people can't sometimes change on their own. And so use coaching and mentoring to really nurture culture change, particularly in this shift to Agile. We've found that you can't just send people to training classes. They really need coaching, they really need mentoring. And then to your celebrating success, one of the ways that I always found really worked isn't just like buy a cake and celebrate it, but ask people to share that. Like we had silly things, but it really worked, like bake-a-thons, where we'd have then contests to see so you bring people together and build that team and then celebrate the success together. Because that inclusiveness in celebration is so critical, so that it's not just highlighting one or two people who've been the obvious leaders, but recognizing that you succeed or fail as a whole. So trying to do things that provide ways to highlight people who might be less visible or less comfortable being in the spotlight.
So we talked about the celebration. We talked about also about the mentoring, identifying the what's next. Like Leslie said, projects never keep going and never keep going and going, but we have to celebrate the milestones that we have there. Also identifying the next set of sponsors that for your next initiatives. What are the so my last question to the panelists: what are the ways that you've been able to sustain the sponsorships in your organizations? How have you, when the project is finished and preparing your organization for the next set of projects, are there any ways that you do to groom your next set of sponsors?
I'll jump in just because I was given this role of being sponsor about 18 months ago and had absolutely zero preparation for it. And, it's definitely 50% of my job, and my job is a full-time job as it is. So just kind of struggling to find that balance has been difficult. And in terms of what we can do, as an agency to better prepare the next level of leadership, to take on these kinds of enormous projects with all the kind of political stakeholders and long hours is something that I'm talking with our CEO and COO about, because I think that, you know, in terms of success and all of the kind of potential for getting into the B and things like that, you know, you can't sort of step in, and well, you can, but it's not optimal, it's not ideal. And so some kind of more formal training course. I mean, we have training for folks on Excel. Why wouldn't we have training for something as critical, as important as this?
Andrew, just maybe
Yes.
a follow-up, but what was your biggest surprise moving into the role of an executive sponsor?
You know, I think the biggest surprise was just the time commitment and the tremendous amount of learning. I mean, I came from the business. I was in director over member education. So I had some exposure to the project because I was part of the selection team. So we read the RFP. We went and toured a couple of different systems in different states and had an idea of what that looked like. But in terms of becoming the sponsor and having to kind of, you know, well, do I read every deliverable? Well, that's not going to work. Do I go to every meeting? Well, that's not going to work. So just kind of trying to define what I needed to do. There's nobody there to tell me what to do. And so that kind of learning that I had to do on my own was, you know, it's been somewhat helpful. And I had a strong partner in our chief technology officer. But in terms of understanding what I needed to do, it's taken a year and a half just to sort of get my arms around it, and I didn't think it would be like that.
Okay, do we have any questions from the group that we want to ask our panelists? Okay.
Maybe, can I ask one other question too? And I'm gonna use a phrase, the biggest time suck. So if you have, you know, sharing with people that are brand new to sponsorship, what is the one thing that is going to suck your time that provides the least amount of value so that they could learn something in terms of avoiding pitfall going in? Any thoughts, Kathy?
I mean, I would say sometimes the biggest time sucks are addressing those barriers that you didn't anticipate, like all of a sudden being told that you don't actually have the authority to do something you want to do and having to go battle it out with legal and figure out, you know, is there, I mean, my mantra was generally, if there's a law or a regulation that says I can't do this, then fine, show it to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if this is about practice and tradition, then guess what? We're shifting gears and get on board. So really trying to, before you spend huge amounts of time trying to figure out how to not do something that you were planning to do because you were told you can't, try to quickly get to the bottom of, can you really not do it, or is it just somebody who's uncomfortable with change?
Other thoughts from the panel on big time sucks?
Well, it depends if your project you implemented were rolled out in a successful manner or not.
You know, and I think another thing is to gather the data that demonstrates success, because another big time suck is constantly trying to remind people why it is that this is valuable and why it should be expanded. And if you haven't established up front the metrics to be able to demonstrate value, it's really hard to gather them retroactively. So you need to have a baseline, and you need to have what's the as-is situation, like what's the customer experience today? How long does it take to process a claim? Or how many claims does an average adjudicator handle in a given time period? Figure out what are the metrics that are meaningful, not the ones that just sound good, but what actually affects the business. Mm-hmm. Gather that data right from the start, and then assemble it in some meaningful way using analytics tools and visualization tools so you can quickly share with other executive leaders or other stakeholders what the impact of this project has been and what the justification might be for replicating it, expanding it, or if it doesn't work out so well, for killing it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say one of the biggest time sucks for me personally, in sort of a cautionary note, is when you're putting the project together and you're looking at the project structure, because the project will have its own org chart, you know, be very clear about what key resources you want where. I inherited a situation where our change management team was in the technology area, and we all agreed it should move into the business area. But of course, this is civil service. Everybody was off probation. And so, it literally has been 6 months and maybe 24 meetings. So a real time suck just to make one simple, effective shift that I think is everybody agrees is in the best interest of the project. It's just, there's so many steps to go through it. So a little bit of kind of forethought on the front end, from my perspective, would have avoided a giant time suck on the back end.
Okay. Yesenia, you talk about Agile next.
What's agile? Good Lord, what is it? So let me ask you a question. Where is the disruption coming from, right? The focus of today's conversation is about, kind of knowing that there are disruptive forces out there, and how do we then, equip ourselves to manage through and come out and be relevant to, this constituents, the stakeholders that we serve. So, where are the disruptions coming from in your, kind of in your area, in your department? Sorry. From the microphone. Anyone? Panelists.
Sometimes they're interior, sometimes they're scope creep and staff running wild with what they thought they were doing, and we weren't clear up front about what our project was. Sometimes they're external, sometimes they're things you can't anticipate, changes in legislation. We had a project, one of the pieces was our biobank. We've built this enormous 70-foot long freezer, and then the county fire marshal said you had to have sprinklers inside the -20 freezer. Who would have thought? So then there's a step that you can't go live until you do that, and there's all sorts of things that you have to learn, because you have to learn about how do you put out a fire in a -20 freezer. Obviously, it's not water. So things that you have to step back, all sorts of things. The thing that you never think is going to happen is going to happen.
Right.
And always plan for extra time in your timeline, because you're never going to bring it live as fast as you think you're going to.
It's legislative changes, right? Policy changes, procedure changes, user expectations change. Technology introduces new ways of doing things, right? New innovations. There's workforce transition, right? It's like we are not in a, we all, come and work the same amount of time, right? People are in different spectrums of, their journey to retirement. And so, so there is disruption coming from all sorts of places, right? Internal to the organization, kind of coming down from the top, coming out from the public sphere, right? Kind of media, all of those, those different places that can just bring something that you may have not planned for, but that you may have, and you just experience it different, right? You could have a really good stakeholder plan, and all of a sudden, the one stakeholder that you thought you had mapped out, has a different point of view maybe than what was anticipated. So disruption is coming from everywhere, and it is okay, right? Because what we have at our fingertips is the ability to adapt. And I think one of the things when we're talking about agile, right? We're both talking about a framework of getting things done, but we're also talking about an innate ability to be able to handle things, right? To be able to take information in, to make informed decisions, and to be able to come out with with a point of view. And so we need to kind of look at agile in both the framework to get things done, but also the behaviors that we can embody. That even if we are still doing traditional projects, right? There are behaviors that we can move to that will help us, kind of ease into and along the continuum of moving to agile. Because the reality is that tomorrow we're not going to wake up, and all of the projects that are still ongoing are not going to change in their framework. And so some of our responsibility as sponsors, as leaders, is to understand where the changes are coming from, what are options available to us, and how do we make incremental movements so that as we do encounter disruption, it doesn't have to be explosive, massive, large-scale disruption. It can be innovations. It can be changes that are on a smaller scale that will move us along in a continuum. And so from a framework perspective, and in today's sessions, you're going to have, kind of the deep dives into the framework, right? Kind of the key differences from the waterfall, methodology of the world into the agile world is a lot in concepts. And I think what we can take away is a lot of this is in learning a new vocabulary. There is a language that comes with culture change, right? And we need to be equipping ourselves with the language to be able to guide ourselves and our projects along this, this continuous change. And so we can move from, in a waterfall, right, it is very plan driven. What are the requirements, right? What are the contract structures? What's the resource, loaded project schedule, right? There's lots of things that anchor us to, kind of to a plan. In the agile world, we're moving into more iterative, more collaborative, more learning based, right? Instead of, some of the language shifts are, in a waterfall, you would be asking about, kind of your defect metrics or your, kind of very tangible, very tactical things. In an agile methodology, you're starting to ask more questions about what are we learning, right? It's like what is coming out of, what's the user story? What are we learning from, kind of these small sprints, right? What can we get and how fast? It's not what are we missing, right? Where in a waterfall, we need to bring all the requirements along with us. In Agile, part of the principle is to be able to say, is this one requirement that we had defined for this user story, but isn't shaking out the way that we're expecting it to in this time box that we have, can we do without it? Right? What is its true prioritization? Can it, does it have to be in it or can it move? And so Agile is really giving us an opportunity to, again, have a new framework, but also in the, in the physical sense of being Agile, is asking ourselves the key questions about flexibility. What do we have to have, and what can we then begin to move into other parts or release entirely? Because let me ask the panelists a question. Is it okay to ask for change?
You bet.
It is.
I would even flip it around. Is it okay to not ask for change? No.
It's like, and so like I said, what I find exciting about this new, this, and it's and that's actually not new. Innovation has been happening since the beginning of time, right? We're just giving it a new vocabulary, and so part of it is the framework is exciting to be moving into when we know big, large-scale projects. It's exciting to think that even within those, we can start moving along the continuum of how do we adopt, kind of this, this framework that is in front of us today. And it also applies more than just software development, right? We are, most of us, a lot of us on IT projects, and it's really easy to kind of continue to think about the framework of software development. But again, as leaders, as sponsors, we can also be thinking about how do we move our, the other dimensions of managing and sponsoring projects along the Agile continuum. Is there an opportunity to transform how we are doing our communications, how we are delivering our training, right? Podcasting, webcasting, these other things are very easy technologies or easy changes to get into that help the rest of the organization see success and see how it works. And the bigger parts of your project that maybe aren't so easily changed into a framework, they begin to see how they can start to make the transitions. And so, so Agile is not just software, it is not just a framework, it's a behavior. And yet we still have the, kind of the anchors, the tenets of project management. We don't let go of a schedule. We don't let go of measuring ourselves. We don't let go, kind of knowing where we are. We are simply doing it in different proportions, at a different pace, in an iterative approach, right? We are still planning, right? We still need to have what do we need to accomplish? What does the user need? What do we need to do? We still have design, right? It's like we're still, kind of putting together the things of what we need to get this, product to do. We're still in a build. We still have a test. It's just in smaller sprints and iterative cycles in a more collaborative, dynamic, dialogue-driven, learning-driven framework. And that's exciting, right? Because what does it help us do? It helps us make small changes to get to, success, more and more successful outcomes. But it also makes the learning environment safe, right? When we are waiting for 15 months to get something done in a waterfall method, right? We've heard it, right? We're in front of the SAC B or, that is boy, right, like you start to sit up straighter when, when that outcome is, you start holding your breath, right, as you get ready for go live. In these smaller sprints and with a different way of thinking about it, right, it's like we're asking ourselves, what are we learning and what can we put out, into the ecosystem, right? So there's always something going out into the ecosystem, which is helpful. We are realizing value and we are iterating continuously so that we, don't have, again, in disruption, a massive disruption over at 15 months from now. We have smaller, disruptions, and let's be positive, smaller innovations going along, kind of a time scale. And we still have, so along with, managing these projects and being sponsors, right, it's like the behaviors that will help us kind of get to, this learning-driven, this user-focused, user-centric place is we have to talk to people. Now, we have to have data, of course we do. We need to have documentation, of course we do. But the dialogue, kind of in this framework is as important as all the other things. A story is told by the people who are making use of this product that we have all invested in. We need to be showing, right? What Agile gives us is the opportunity to see a working version of this, kind of along a continuum. So we are seeing something out being useful, and then we're talking to people about, okay, now does it need something else? Because it might be that in a traditional world, we had 1,500 requirements, but if we have the product in the user's hands quickly, it might be that those things, yes, at the point in time that we thought about those 1,500 things, legislation has changed, administrative priorities have changed, funding has changed, resourcing has changed, right? Skill set, technologies, so many things are in a constantly evolving, point in time that when we get a smaller product into the hands of a user, it may be that that's okay, and now we can do something else or iterate on it. So, talking to people, showing a product, expecting incremental implementation improvements, right? Making those short-term gains, and then, as sponsors, again, removing the barriers, right? You all have said that is, that's probably the one thing, that project teams to project managers are looking for, is they are looking for someone to say, it is okay for us to shed some of this, some of this structure. And so as sponsors, the thing that we can be doing is aiming for the smoothest possible workflow, right? And so as we said about, setting expectations early on, right? There's certainly as a sponsor, you want to be well informed. You want to have the data, the metrics, right? The analytics that tell you, are we doing what we need? But let me ask, have there been times when you have recognized that sometimes the administration has been a barrier to, kind of the actual getting the work done? And how have you been courageous enough to, kind of to call it?
I'll start. Yes, because like anything, we're the owners of the program, and we know how the programs work generally, or the people below, to a certain degree. And there's always a gap in learning and understanding between what we're administering, what we're trying to do, versus the sort of the oversight of it, if you will. And there's just so much education to really fill the gaps and bring forth the again, sort of the vision that we have in mind, what we're trying to do, what it means, and make sure that they're getting full knowledge of what's going on, to make sure that we move it in a direction that would really suit our customers to the best possible way. So a lot of it is just not understanding whether it's the program or the technology that's being implemented, and you just have to have real honest dialogue and bring forth the information.
I think that's an area where having that qualitative research is so powerful, because if you present people with evidence of actual users having needs that either aren't being met at all or aren't being met well, it's irrefutable. And so very, very powerful to share that user research with folks who either are reticent or just haven't bought in, or just trying to learn why something might be needed.
And so the last, kind of the last, one of those last behaviors, right, that will help us, again, no matter what we're doing, because I really do think, that these behaviors are applicable no matter what framework and, what dimension of a project, that we are either sponsoring or managing. But time, right, we're all, working against a clock. And so one of, again, the expectation changes and the language changes that can begin to happen no matter where we are is about perfection, right? People will be afraid to put themselves out there if they're going to be, graded on perfection. And so, we will set ourselves up, right, to be disillusioned. And what we want to set ourselves up for is to be delighted. Let's be delighted about what we're accomplishing. And so this agile framework and this language and this culture shift helps us do that in, kind of in a better way. So sponsorship in a dynamic environment, again, these are things that you do, right? This is not, we did not invent the wheel here with Agile, but what I think we should take away is that our, in sponsorship, in, leadership, in organizations as large and complex and, so integral to the fabric of, the lives of Californians, what we need to be doing as sponsors is create an alignment. Right, what are we trying to achieve with the business, right? And as a culture, right, there's, this is one of the largest employers in the United States, right? What is the culture of California going to be? And as sponsors, you are not only shaping, informing, and nurturing the culture of your project, you're also doing it for the entire California ecosystem. So, just an incredible, opportunity to at the micro level, right, understand what you need to be doing, creating alignment at the macro level, really influencing what's happening statewide. Communicating, right? We've heard it here, we heard it in the morning remarks. Communication is one of the core, qualities, good, effective communication of a great sponsor, right? It's being able to know how to filter information, right? What's important. Because anyone will give us a dozen packets of information, right? The role of the sponsor is to be able to consume the information, digest it, and come out with a point of view so that you can go create the alignment, right? Without having to take 12 different decks with you. Gaining commitments, right? Project sponsorship is about, aligning the things that are needed, right? The people that are needed. Policy changes, right? Have you guys had to change policy, right? Having to change procedures. There are things that come along with this responsibility and sponsorship, and so you are the ones that are identifying the changes that are needed and going after them so that the project can benefit from the change. Resourcing, right? In Agile, in Waterfall, in your day-to-day operations of your departments, right? Nothing can get done without the resources available to us. And so, again, in this Agile framework, people are constantly learning. So the culture changes from it has the opportunity to change from a simply doing to a constantly learning, right? And so now, the opportunities of people being able to come in and out, based on interest and capability, or capacity, right? Are also something that, that is changing, kind of the way that we organize work. Facilitating problem solving, of course, supporting the project manager, right? Every project manager wants to feel, successful and wants to feel supported. And so sponsorship is about, understanding how this relationship is going to work and what the project manager needs to be and feel successful and what you need to, to be successful, because again, you're also accountable to someone. And so, support is really big. And then, building legacy, right? It's like we, where, in this mornings, we're putting our banner on to be architects of the future, right? But, in it implies that we're leaving a legacy, right? So sponsorship is about owning and investing in that legacy that you want to leave. And so just one last slide, and it was funny because even as we were putting things together, to speak to you today, we've seen this, this slide for why IT projects fail. There's just, there's no shortage of slideware out there that looks like this. And so, Agile projects are not all successful. They, although 18% of these respondents, have never seen a failure, 12% have said that the company philosophy or the culture, being at odds with this new framework are, kind of is a reason, and right, from these numbers, the majority of why, agile projects can also not be successful. And so, we have been talking about, in this discussion and in this morning's discussion about, we're certainly talking about managing projects, about delivering projects, right? But it is about the culture that sponsors and leaders will create that will enable, again, that continuous, shift into the future. And so while disruption may happen, if we're making small shifts, right, we can manage it. If we are constantly innovating, we are giving our end users, our constituencies, better and better tools with which to do the things that we ask them to do, the very hard work, right, of serving, the citizens. And so this agile framework from both a methodology and from just a construct of behavior will help us, kind of in this journey to be, better, servants, right, public servants, and that is our goal. So I want to leave you with one thing from a, kind of from, before we just enter into question and answers with our panelists. Sponsorship is about doing something. Agree or disagree? How many people agree? It's about doing something, right? And so, so I'm just going to give a little anecdote that happened, and it happened this weekend. So my boss sent an email this weekend that said, what bets can we put out there? What risks should we be looking to take on to deliver our project better? And so when the ecosystem can be very risk averse because there are so many unknowns out there, the ecosystem also has an opportunity to be courageous. And so what does it feel like to get an email from your boss that says, hey, think about what risks we want to take, right? That's changing in the right direction, right? It's like, and so it is inspirational. And so what I leave you with for this portion of the session is that we have an opportunity, you have an opportunity in your role to be courageous leaders and to do something every day that will help your constituency on your project be successful and be motivated and be leading and learning kind of in this, shifting times. Embracing the disruption doesn't have to lead to dysfunction. It can lead to innovation. We will now open for just questions with our panelists.
I was going to ask Yesenia another question too, and one of the things that Yesenia mentioned is about the support from the project manager, and we touched a little bit on executive sponsors still need support from above. So as an executive sponsor, can you share with the audience what you need from those above you to whom you are accountable for that particular effort? What really you need from them to be successful? If you had to go and ask for it and be the courageous leader, what are you going to ask for?
We're working sort of on that same thing right now, but it's the ask for helping that shared vision, asking them to go along with you, to see it, to feel it, and having specific asks for them, whether it's help me bridge that gap with Department of Technology, help me bridge the gap with the Department of Finance, help me bridge the gap with administration, because we're trying to move the vision up, and we need help with that story. And they play a key role. At any time I know that we're implementing a project or undertaking a project, it's in partnership with our agency, and they've been tremendous help. So you have to have that support.
Yeah, I think it's two things. One is top cover. Sometimes you need top cover because you're doing things that are different. I mean, when we stood up the Presidential Innovation Fellows in 18F, I needed a lot, and myself and the other folks who were leading that effort, we needed a lot of top cover because there were people throwing daggers at us, like, no, you can't do that, that's crazy, that's different. So top cover and sort of championship and evangelism, because you want at that very top executive level, you want to have an executive champion and ambassador who can validate the value of the project and what you're doing, and be an evangelist for it with his or her peers so that others will say, gosh, that's really neat. We should participate, or we should replicate that, or we should support that. How can we help? So those are two roles that I think are valuable.
Yeah, I'll just underscore the importance of alignment. With two executive sponsors working on the project, people see us every day. We're very involved, we're very engaged. And sometimes, there's a question, are the, COO and CEO aware and understanding and in alignment? And so we try to create, from that specific ask that you recommended, key opportunities for them to come and talk about the project from their perspective and what they see, and kind of, giving the team, the larger project team, that insight into what the very top of the organization is seeing of the project and what their expectations are.
Yeah, I'm here as a project manager, and as such, I'm hoping to learn some things that will help me help my sponsors. Thinking of that, what do you wish your PMs would do differently to help you? What are some examples you wish they would improve or do differently?
Well, I'll start. I wished in many cases that my PMs provided me with clearer, actionable data that was well presented, or material that was well thought out, clear, and concise, so that I didn't have to wade through a whole lot of stuff that actually was potentially nice, but not really terribly meaningful. So really hone what you're presenting to your executive sponsor, so it's clear what you want them to do and why.
I'll echo that. We have a number, I can point to a number of instances where, we've gotten a situation, a problem, a paper, a presentation from our project manager that was well-intentioned and, it was well done. Just in terms of relevance and kind of what we needed to do then, creates a lot more work. It wasn't just this document, then I had to have meetings and ask people questions and kind of get the context around it. So kind of that forethought around what's the context of, the situation or the context of the ask that I have for the sponsor, so that helps kind of clarify what direction I might need to give.
I think I have an excellent project manager. I've had her on 4 projects now. I keep continuing. I think the one thing for her is she's not as timely as she could be. If I were to sit down with her, and we have talked number of times about getting me things in advance. I can't be prepared. I can't talk to the right people in advance if you're handing me documents right before I walk into a meeting. So please be conscious of the fact that I can't spend 75% of my time on this, and I've got a little niche of time carved out. Get things to me in advance.
I think one other thing that's really important is to make sure that your project managers are comfortable asking for help. And so helping them know that it's okay to ask questions. Ask me questions early, because I'd much rather help clarify something early, or understand that there's a problem and be able to help fix it, or even just know that that there is a problem, but the project manager has it under control. I'd rather hear about it early from the project manager than from other sources. So early escalation, either for help or just awareness, and being clear whether you need help or you just want them to be aware. Distinguishing between those two is valuable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about disruptive changes in the marketplace in terms of agile, in terms of Internet of Things, or advanced analytics and visualization. So what role, and there's always this conflicting forces between desire to grow and resistance to change. So what role does an executive sponsor play in terms of educating their staff to be more receptive to those disruptive changes in the market? Any of the changes that we talked about? Can you guys?
So I think the executive sponsor has a very key role in doing that, in bringing to the team new ideas, new technologies, or empowering them and asking them to bring them forward. It should go both ways, because you don't want a team to simply rely on their leadership to make them aware of great new stuff that can help them. You have to create an environment in where You talk about what's new. You encourage people to, for instance, share stuff they've read that's relevant, or bring in an outside speaker to spark their imagination. So I think it goes both ways, but it's really, really critical.
Here's a technique that I use. I have 9 deputies that report to me, and anything that I see that I think is critical for our department, that I want to move forward on and garnish their support, I start, depending on the situation, anywhere from 6 months to a year in advance of even making a decision. I talk about it at every meeting. I talk about the vision. Wouldn't be great? We need this. Doesn't this make sense? Here's the analytics around it. All of that. So by the time I get to a decision-making point, a lot of times the deputies, well, didn't we already approve that? I thought we already agreed to that. So I take them on the journey and paint the picture over and over and talk about it until they're like annoyed and feel like we're already there. So just something that I use. Now, don't tell my deputies that.
Well, we are about out of time, and I just want to express our gratitude for the time and the wisdom and the insight that our panelists have shared with us. Thank you so much. To you for being participants in this event, thank you for spending your day with us, kind of learning, just taking back, kind of to your organization and being the role models to, kind of to this learning-driven culture. I will invite Rachel to come up with some wrap-up comments, and then a thank you to our staff who has helped us execute on today's session.
Thanks, Yesenia. I did want to actually follow up on one thing that Andrew had mentioned, that there wasn't really a formal training when folks get dubbed as the executive sponsor, because some people do get voluntold that you are the executive sponsor. It's not always a volunteer role, it may be a voluntold role. But I would be curious from the audience if you thought that that would be meaningful, that someone would actually go through, and we prepare CFOs for transition. People prepare to become CIOs. People prepare to become the CDO. Name the role. Usually there is something. At OSI, there are project management trainings that folks go through as well. But I'm just curious about whether or not there would be interest that we could, provide back to the state in a formal program where people could get training as an executive sponsor. And then also maybe just a question about a community of practice as well. And you had mentioned, Andrew, that as you're going through and talking to projects about similar things that they're going through, that you reach out to someone. But do you know who the executive sponsors are? And is there that community building that happens within the state? I'm curious to ask, the panel, if you think it may be worthwhile for those that you may want to mentor, or is the one-on-one maybe sufficient today to provide that level of mentorship?
Well, and there is a training class. I've taken I've taken a class in executive sponsorship.
Oh, I wasn't aware. Okay.
Yeah. It was a one-day kind of seminar thing, but
Okay.
there is one.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I actually didn't know that there was one. Okay. All right. Is there what about as far as a community of practice? Is that something that folks may see maybe beneficial for individuals as they're going through? And this is not, I wouldn't say just as executive sponsors, but as project managers to actually get together and share ideas and thoughts and concepts around it as well. Maybe as an.
I would say that, but I would also put the onus back on project managers and soon-to-be sponsors. That put the onus back too. This is a great time to start talking to the people that are executive sponsors today and picking their brains. We always talk about mentorship. Well, there's that accountability on the people coming up through to make sure that they have all the skills and abilities. And, we've talked a lot about the things that you need to know about and whatnot, but there's so much more. We're just touching on the surface, particularly if sometimes projects temporarily don't end up implementing in the way you think they should. And you have a period of time where you're making sure you're getting back on track. The world around us, things happen, and you have to be able to be prepared, whether it's responding to the media or finding that you have a reporter at your car door wanting to talk to you, or going to the legislature, or all of that. That isn't normally something that we, as if you've come up through civil service or even appointed, that we deal with typically. But those are skills that you need to know about and be prepared for. And the best way to do that is to talk to people that have been in this situation or are currently executive sponsors or former executive sponsors. Really take the opportunity to pick their brain. So that'd be my call to action for you.
Fantastic. All right, so just, I would say just a couple of key takeaways that we want you to walk away from today is definitely to know the difference between being in the weeds of what you've done as you've grown up as a project manager versus being a sponsor, and then how also to engage that steering committee as you're actually executing or you're planning the project at the beginning. Also to make sure that you're engaged throughout the project. One of the things, you know, as your role changes, there will be varying degrees of engagement. At the beginning, it may be bigger. As you're going through tougher times, you may have to be engaged. The one big takeaway that we did hear from our sponsors overall for this entire delivery summit is to make sure that even when you get into your development operations or your M&O, that engagement stays. Just because a project is in maintenance, I don't think any of our projects are really ever purely maintenance. There are always disruptions that are going to happen, no matter what. So that level of involvement is pretty critical. And making sure that you understand how big of a commitment it is as well. It is not, I don't think I have ever seen a sponsor where it is their sole job. It is, you know, in addition to something that they already do. So make sure that you understand that commitment. And if the commitment of time is a challenge, to make sure someone knows, because this is something that people are going to be counting upon you as the sponsor to really be the champion of that project and carry it forward. So don't hesitate if there is a time commitment challenge. Make sure that you're creating that right culture or environment is really critical, especially as we're moving into a new world of different delivery models. That culture of empowerment really needs to be there, and embracing that and making sure that you're creating that sense of ownership with that group and really championing the change as you move forward. The communication aspect, I think the panel and everyone in the audience touched on that one probably to the very end, about the transparency, creating that open environment where people can come and talk to you if they foresee any type of issues. And also that communication above. Don't be afraid to ask if you do need the air cover for something that may take place, as Kathy had talked about, and you really need somebody to stand there by your side and be your block and tackler. And then make it personal. That's the last thing that we really ask is get involved, show your level of commitment, and definitely celebrate those instances of value that you're creating along the way. Don't wait until the end of the 15 months. Anytime that you have an opportunity to celebrate and get in there with the team to do that. Okay, so with that, again, I want to thank the panel and my, let's say my colleague in this with Yesenia and the team that supported it, and all of you for your engagement. And have a good rest of the conference. Thank you.